Rain hissed across the motor pool as engines grumbled beneath canvas tarps. Men stood in silence, their breath rising like steam from ghosts. Mac stared at the hulking silhouette before him, a machine he'd only heard whispers of, the M26 Pershing. Its armor glistened under floodlights, taller and meaner than the Shermans they'd ridden through hell with. Around him, voices murmured about Cologne, about tigers prowling ahead. Alvarez ran his hand along the gun barrel, grinning like a man meeting destiny. 90 millimeters, he said softly. That's our ticket home. Daniels strode over, clipboard under one arm, the smell of fuel thick around him. We move at dawn, he said. Highway north. First contact expected inside the city. No one replied. They didn't need to. The war had changed again, and steel, not men, would decide who lived through morning. Morning broke under a curtain of fog. The convoy rolled north, Pershings lumbering through half-frozen mud like steel beasts finding their footing. Mac's voice crackled over the intercom, half reassurance, half prayer. Alvarez adjusted the elevation wheel, testing the recoil system again and again. Feels different, he muttered, and Mac nodded, even though Alvarez couldn't see it. Trucks passed them carrying infantry, men staring at the new tanks as though they were something from another world. Overhead, the gray sky pressed low and heavy, the scent of war thick in the air. They passed burned-out Shermans, their hulls twisted open, silent memorials on the roadside. The men said nothing. They knew what waited ahead, and this time, they were bringing something that might just shoot back hard enough. By noon, the convoy halted in a valley near a shattered farmhouse. Daniels climbed out, scanning the horizon through binoculars. Reports came in of German armor regrouping near Cologne. Tigers. Confirmed. Mac felt his stomach tighten. The last time he'd heard that word, he'd buried half his platoon. But Alvarez laughed softly, tapping the side of the 90mm. Let them come, he said. This thing was built for them. Daniels didn't smile. He just lowered the binoculars and whispered, "Then let's prove it." The men dismounted briefly to stretch. Mud clung to their boots and silence hung over the landscape like a held breath. Somewhere far ahead, they heard the faint roar of German engines, deep, throaty, deliberate. Sounds like cats, Alvarez murmured. Mac just nodded, eyes narrowing toward the sound. They didn't know it yet, but the tigers were already waiting beyond the next ridge. Night crept in as they reached the outskirts of Cologne. The city smoldered, its skyline fractured by fire and ruins. The crew parked the Pershing behind the remnants of a stone wall. Daniel's voice came through the radio. Enemy armor confirmed inside the city. We go in at first light. Max stared at the horizon. Orange fire against black smoke, and felt the old fear return. But now, for the first time in months, it was matched by something else. Hope, shaped like steel and painted olive drab. Dawn crawled over the ruins like a reluctant ghost. Cologne's cathedral spires rose out of the smoke, their blackened peaks clawing at the gray sky. Max Pershing crept forward through rubble-strewn streets, treads grinding over broken glass and brick. Radio chatter flickered with static, Daniel's voice, steady and clipped, guiding them street by street. Somewhere in the distance, the deep mechanical growl of German engines echoed like thunder. In a bombed-out cafe across the river, Hoffner's Tiger crew waited, their laughter sharp against the hum of idling diesel. Amerikaner Panzer, Hoffner sneered. They bring toys to fight gods. His loader, young Rauch, forced a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Outside, the Pershings advanced unseen, shadows sliding through the smoke toward the monsters that had ruled these streets for too long. German reconnaissance units reported movement. Heavy tanks, American markings. Hoffner smirked as he adjusted his headset. So, they finally bring something new, he said. Let's see how long it lasts. His gunner loaded an armor-piercing shell with a metallic click that echoed like a death sentence. Meanwhile, Mac's crew navigated tight corners, turrets rotating slow and deliberate. The Pershing's engine purred low, the crew whispering through intercoms like men afraid to wake the dead. Alvarez stared through the gun sight, searching for any hint of movement. "They're here," he muttered. "I can smell 'em." In the ruins ahead, Hoffner whispered the same words in German. Two hunters closing on the same breath of fear. The first exchange came at midday. Hoffner's Tiger fired across a courtyard, its shell screaming through the air and slamming into a Sherman several blocks away. The explosion echoed through the ruins like a cathedral collapsing. Mac's crew flinched at the sound. "Tiger! 1 o'clock!" Alvarez shouted. Daniel's voice cut through the static. "Pershing's form line. Stay low. Keep moving." Mac's heart hammered as the Pershing rolled forward, every corner a death trap. He could feel the Tiger's eyes on them somewhere beyond the smoke. This was the hunt, and they were no longer prey. Inside the Tiger, the crew was confident, almost smug. Hoffner's voice was calm, almost gentle as he guided his gunner. "Wait for them to come. 1 shot, 1 kill." Rausch's hands trembled on the shell he held, the air inside the tank thick with diesel and fear. Outside, Mac's Pershing crawled through an alley, treads grinding against bricks. Alvarez adjusted elevation again, teeth clenched. "We're walking into their sights," he whispered. Mac didn't answer. He already knew. The Tiger's cannon swiveled slowly toward them, its black muzzle cutting through smoke like a serpent's eye. A silence settled over the city, the kind that comes before lightning strikes. Both sides waited, engines idling low, nerves stretched thin. Then, through the haze, Hoffner caught movement, the silhouette of the Pershing edging past the wreckage of a trolley. "Jetzt," he hissed. The Tiger's cannon fired, the blast tearing through the street. The shell missed, slamming into a wall beside Mac's tank and showering them in brick dust. "Tiger!" Alvarez shouted, already swinging the 90mm toward the flash. Mac barked orders, adrenaline spiking. "Load up! Get me a range!" The crew worked like a single heartbeat. The Pershing's gun rising, locking, breathing in before the war exhaled again. The city had become a labyrinth of ruin and smoke. Cologne's streets twisted between collapsed buildings, each turn concealing death. Mac's Pershing rolled forward in silence, its engine growling low as they entered the cathedral district. The Gothic spires loomed above, half shattered but still defiant, black against a sky bruised with ash. Alvarez wiped sweat from his brow, the gun sight trembling slightly under his grip. "Feels like walking through a grave," he muttered. Mac nodded. The radio crackled. Daniel's voice, calm and metallic. "All Pershings, hold formation. Watch your corners." Ahead, a Tiger's turret silhouette shifted behind a toppled trolley car, the faint glint of armor betraying its lair. Mac's pulse thudded in his ears. The city held its breath, waiting for the shot that would decide who ruled its ashes. Inside the Tiger, Hoffner watched through the periscope, eyes narrowed to slits. The Pershing's outline flickered between clouds of dust and smoke, slower than a Sherman, heavier, almost regal in its movement. "Aim low," he murmured. Through the front plate, Rausch's fingers tightened on the shell, sliding it into the breech with trembling precision. The gunner exhaled and fired. The Tiger roared. Across the street, the shell struck the Pershing's glacis with a metallic scream, sparks showering into the smoke. Mac's head slammed against the hatch. "Hit, but not through," Alvarez shouted. The crew's shock turned to disbelief. They'd taken a Tiger's bite and survived. The crew reeled from the shock, ears ringing, lungs full of smoke. Mac's voice broke through the chaos. "Alvarez on him." The gunner already had his hands on the traverse, turning the turret toward the Tiger's muzzle flash. Daniel's voice cut through the static. "Make it count, McConnell." Alvarez aligned the crosshairs, the world narrowing to that single glint of armor behind the trolley. Range. 800. Mac's voice steadied. Fire. The 90mm roared like judgment itself. The shell streaked through the smoke and slammed into the Tiger's turret. The explosion was deafening, a bloom of black fire swallowing steel. The Tiger's engine howled once, then went silent. Hoffner slumped against the hatch, smoke curling around him like a shroud. Rauch stumbled out of the turret, face pale, staring at the burning wreckage that had once been invincible. Across the street, Max Pershing sat motionless, gun barrel still smoking, the crew too stunned to speak. "Did we?" Alvarez began, but the answer was already before them, black and final. Over the radio, Daniel's voice broke through. Calm but reverent. Confirmed kill. For a long moment, no one moved. The myth had burned, and they had lit the match. Smoke cleared slowly, revealing the cathedral standing amid silence. Mac looked across at the wreck of the Tiger, a monument to arrogance now burning in the street. Alvarez exhaled, laughter trembling in his chest. "One shot," he said softly. "One damn shot." Daniel's Pershing rolled up beside them, its crew staring in awe. For the first time, Max smiled, faint and tired. Guess the Germans found something to respect. The air was thick with burnt oil and victory's bitter scent. Somewhere behind them, the radio crackled with new orders. But for this heartbeat in history, every man in that crew just sat there, alive, unbroken, staring at the dawn rising behind the smoke. The echo of the first kill still drifted through the ruined streets. But victory had a short half-life in war. Daniel's voice came through the radio. Multiple Tigers moving in from the west. "They're not done yet." Mac felt the words settle heavy in his chest. Across the ruins, fresh engines growled, the deep, rolling thunder of German armor closing in. Alvarez scanned the smoke with narrowed eyes. "We just kicked the hornet's nest," he muttered. Mac gave a grim nod. "Then we finish what we started." The Pershings fanned out, their engines snarling to life again. Somewhere in the smoke, Hoffner's comrades were coming, veterans who'd heard the story of the invincible Tiger and now sought revenge for the first that had fallen. In the shattered square near the cathedral, the Tigers regrouped, 3 of them, their armor cocked in soot and frost. The German commander, Hauptmann Kruger, barked orders through the din, his voice cutting sharp as a blade. "Hold formation. Let them come to us." He knew pride had killed Hoffner. Now he would kill with patience. His gunner adjusted elevation with methodical calm. Across the square, Max Pershing advanced slowly, turret turning inch by inch. "We see 3, Alvarez whispered. "Finger on the trigger." 3 Tigers, Mac's reply was quiet. "Steady. Then we make it even." The first Tiger fired. The shell screamed across the square, missing by inches but hammering the street beside Mac's tank, flinging chunks of stone against the hull. The Pershing rocked violently. Alvarez swung the gun toward the flash and fired. His shell hit the lead Tiger's side armor, punching through and igniting the fuel tank in a burst of orange fire. The blast sent debris raining down as the crew bailed out, their shouts drowned by the roar of flame. Kruger didn't flinch. "Keep firing," he ordered coldly. "Bleed them." Mac's pulse raced, his voice cutting through the intercom. "Left Tiger's moving. Track him." Alvarez swiveled the gun. "I've got him." Another flash, another shot. The street turned into a storm of steel and fury. 1 Tiger remained, moving through the rubble like a wounded animal. Kruger's tank fired again, the shell glancing off the Pershing's front plate with a deafening clang. Alvarez loaded quickly, breathing hard. "App loaded!" he shouted. Mac steadied his hand on the intercom switch. "Wait! Wait for him to turn." The Tiger rotated its turret, exposing its flank for a heartbeat. "Now." Alvarez fired. The shell punched through the Tiger's side and detonated inside. A plume of fire burst from the hatches, the explosion echoing through the cathedral square. For a moment, everything was silent again. Only the crackle of burning steel and the ringing in their ears remained. The smoke thinned to reveal the square littered with wreckage. 3 tigers silenced, their hulk smoldering under the gray dawn. Max Pershing sat still amid the ruin, its armor scarred but unbroken. Daniel's voice came through the radio, low and reverent. Confirmed. All enemy armor neutralized. Mac leaned back in his seat, exhaustion washing over him. Alvarez wiped a trembling hand across his face. "Guess we're not the underdogs anymore," he muttered. Max smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No," he said, voice rough. "But we're still just men in a machine." Outside, the cathedral bells, half shattered, began to ring, faint, broken notes drifting over the ruins as dawn crept through the smoke. The square lay silent, except for the hiss of cooling metal and the faint crackle of fire devouring the dead. The air reeked of diesel and burnt oil. The perfume of victory, they called it, though none of them felt much like celebrating. Mac climbed down from the Pershing, boots sinking into ash and twisted brass. The tigers lay like slain beasts, their black hulls still smoldering. Alvarez stood beside him, helmet tucked under one arm, staring at the wrecks with hollow eyes. "They said nothing could kill them," he murmured. Mac looked down at the cracked street beneath his feet. "Everything breaks," he said softly. Overhead, the sky began to lighten, and the first snowflakes of spring drifted down through the smoke, landing quietly on steel that would never move again. Daniels approached through the smoke, his face unreadable. He stopped beside Mac, looking at the wrecks that had once dominated Europe's battlefields. "Command will want reports," he said, voice steady but distant. "They'll call this a victory." Mac nodded but didn't answer. Alvarez gave a humorless laugh. "Ain't much left to celebrate." Daniels exhaled slowly, the sound lost in the wind. "War doesn't care about pride, Joe. Just who's still breathing when it ends." They stood in silence, listening to the cooling metal groan like dying animals. Somewhere far off, artillery thundered, a reminder that this was just one street in a war that was still devouring cities whole. Later, when the medics arrived, they found survivors among the German crews, dazed men with blistered faces and hollow stares. Mac watched as one was pulled from the wreckage, his uniform blackened, eyes unfocused. Rauch, barely more than a boy, coughed through soot and whispered a single word. "Hoffner." Mac recognized the name. The first tiger they destroyed. He crouched down, unsure if the kid even knew who he was talking to. "He fought well," Mac said quietly. Rauch blinked slowly, a tear cutting through the grime. "We thought nothing could stop us." Mac swallowed hard, his own throat tightening. "Neither did we." As night fell again, the Pershing crews gathered by their tanks, eating cold rations and speaking in low voices. No laughter now, no boasts, only the quiet hum of engines cooling and the pop of distant gunfire echoing through the city. Alvarez sat on the Pershing's track, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "I can still hear it," he said. "That sound, when the shell hit, when it blew." Mac sat beside him, silent for a long time. "It's the kind of sound that never leaves," he said, finally. "You just learn to live with the echo." Above them, the cathedral's shattered cross caught the moonlight, crooked but still standing. Before dawn, Mac climbed back into his Pershing, resting his hands on the cold metal of the turret. The city was quiet now, broken only by the hum of distant engines and the whisper of falling snow. He looked toward the tiger hulks one last time, black silhouettes in the gray morning, and felt neither pride nor triumph, only understanding. War wasn't about invincibility. It was about endurance, about whose heart still beat when the smoke cleared. "Let's move," he said over the radio. voice steady again. The Pershing's engine roared to life, the crew ready for the next road, the next fight, the next test of men and machines. The ruins of Cologne were quiet now, but not peaceful. Smoke drifted like ghosts through empty streets, curling between shattered stones and burnt-out armor. Max Pershing sat near the cathedral, its engine silent for the first time in 2 days. Inside an abandoned warehouse nearby, captured German crews were being held. The men who'd once called themselves invincible. Max stepped through the doorway, the air thick with the scent of oil, blood, and snow. Among them sat Rauch, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes sunken but alive. He looked up as Mac entered. "You're the one who killed him," he said softly. Mac didn't answer. He just nodded once. Rausch's gaze fell to the floor. "He thought no American shell could break us." Mac looked at the boy, voice low. "Then maybe he never met the men who fire them." Daniels entered behind Mac, the sound of his boots echoing across the concrete. "We've got orders," he said quietly. "We move east after dawn." Mac turned, surprised. "Already?" Daniels nodded. "They want us ready for the Rhine crossing." Mac's eyes lingered on Rauch for a moment, longer before stepping outside. The air hit him cold, sharp, filled with the scent of ash and wet stone. Alvarez was sitting on the Pershing's hull, smoking, staring up at the cathedral towers. "We did it," he said, almost as if to himself. "Tigers are dead." Mac looked at him and shook his head. "No, Joe, just men who drove them." For a long moment, neither spoke, the truth settling heavier than the smoke around them. That night, Mac couldn't sleep. The wind moaned through the ruins, carrying the faint chime of the broken cathedral bells. He sat alone by a small fire near the Pershing, rubbing oil and soot from his hands. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hoffner's Tiger bursting into flame, saw the flash, heard the crack, smelled the burning steel. He told himself it was war, that they'd only done what they had to. But still, a quiet guilt lingered, like smoke that refused to clear. He looked at the tank beside him, its armor dented and streaked with mud, and whispered under his breath, "You're just a machine. We're the ones who pull the trigger." Morning came with new orders and no sentiment. The Pershings were to advance toward the Rhine, cutting through pockets of resistance still clinging to the western banks. Alvarez cleaned the cannon, methodical and silent, while Daniels checked maps with a stoic efficiency that masked fatigue. "Command says the Tigers are pulling back," Daniels said. "Most of what's left is infantry and old panzers." Mac nodded but said nothing. The crew moved like men half awake, their bodies mechanical now, their hearts left somewhere in the ruins behind them. The tank's engine growled to life again, a sound that once felt powerful, now just heavy. Before they rolled out, Rauch was led past the Pershing, his wrists bound loosely with rope. He glanced up at Mac and managed a faint, haunted smile. "He said the Tiger was a king," Rauch whispered. "Now the king is dead." Mac looked at him and gave a slow nod. "So is the war that crowned him." The soldiers led the boy away, his footsteps vanishing into the snow. Mac climbed back into his tank and closed the hatch. The engine thundered to life, drowning out thought, drowning out ghosts. The Pershing moved forward, treads grinding over frost and stone, carrying them toward the next town, the next fight, the next reckoning. The road to the Rhine was quiet, too quiet for men who'd lived by the sound of engines and explosions. The war was bleeding out, but no one dared to believe it. Max Pershing led the column across farmland littered with the ghosts of battles past, rusting panzer wrecks, burned-out trucks, and fields churned to mud. Snow melted beneath the tank's treads, leaving long, dark scars in the thawing earth. Alvarez leaned out from the turret, scanning the horizon. Feels like the world's holding its breath, he said. Mac nodded, eyes fixed ahead. Maybe it's just waiting to see if we stop killing long enough to breathe. The Pershing rolled on, its engine a steady heartbeat, in a land that had forgotten peace. At midday they halted near the river. The air was thick with fog, the world beyond the banks invisible. Daniels climbed down from his tank, his boots crunching over gravel. "This is it," he said. The Rhine. The word carried a weight none of them could explain. An invisible line between what had been and what came next. Mac dismounted, walking toward the water's edge. The surface reflected only gray, endless and cold. Alvarez joined him, tossing a spent shell casing into the current. "Think they'll remember this?" he asked quietly. Mac's eyes followed the ripples as they disappeared downstream. "They'll remember the tanks," he said. "Not the men who drove them." They bivouacked near the river that night. The Pershings parked in a silent line beneath a dying moon. Mac sat on the hull, a blanket over his shoulders, staring toward the dark water. Alvarez broke the silence, his voice low. "You ever wonder if they were thinking the same thing we were? The guys in those Tigers?" Mac didn't answer for a long moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "Same fear. Same fire. Just different flags." Alvarez nodded, flicking his cigarette into the mud. "Guess nobody wins that kind of war." The wind carried the faint creak of metal from the tanks, a sound like breathing in the dark. Before dawn, word came through. Germany was collapsing. Columns of prisoners streamed west, and the tanks were told to hold position. For the first time, Mac didn't feel relief, only a hollow stillness. He walked along the Pershing's hull, brushing frost from the armor with his glove. Every dent, every scar told a story. A shell that missed, a moment that didn't. Daniels joined him quietly. "When this ends," he said, "what'll you do?" Mac looked up at the pale sky. "Sleep. Maybe remember the names of the ones who didn't." He glanced at the Pershing's long barrel, now cold and still, "and maybe forget the sound it made." Norg should have made. When the sun rose, the war was nearly over. Mac climbed atop his tank one last time, watching the light spill across the river. The crew gathered beside him, silent, each lost in thought. Smoke from distant fires mixed with the morning mist, softening the world that had been hard for too long. Mac rested a hand on the Pershing's turret, the metal cold but familiar. "She did what they said she couldn't," Alvarez murmured. Mac smiled faintly. "No," he said. "We did." The engine rumbled to life, not for battle this time, but to carry them home. As they rolled away from Cologne, the echo of iron faded behind them, leaving only the sound of men breathing, alive, in a world, learning how to live again.